The secrecy is clearly related to that, nothing else. It's all about power. 90% of everything on this subject is disinformation. We have over 450 military and intelligence witnesses. The president was concerned he would end up like Jack Kennedy. Big media does not report the truth about these things because they are not free to. This is the biggest secret in the history of the human race. They move at enormous speeds. For example, they've been tracked at going tens of thousands of miles per hour in the atmosphere and make a right-hand turn without decelerating. There are seriously important technologies that would give us an entirely new sustainable civilization that are being kept secret because in the history of the human race, and particularly in the history of modern government, there's nothing that has been kept more tightly controlled and more secret. And the secrecy has invaded, like a cancer, many institutions, including the media, government, corporation. I have personally briefed members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, members of the Joint Staff, the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States, the head of the Ministry of Defense in Great Britain, our CIA director under Clinton. And what I found was that most of the people in government that you and I would normally think would know about these sort of clandestine issues were being lied to or kept out of the loop. And so that there's this rogue, very well-funded transnational group that's highly corporatized, privatized, that is running this. It is not, when people say the government's keeping this secret, I said the government knows very little. The government are we the people. There are a few people in the government who know, and those control points are lying to their colleagues. For example, there are a few people in Congress and Senate who know about this, but they do not tell their colleagues. And so it's a very dangerous project in the sense that it has subverted the US Constitution, the British rule of law. If you go all over the world, sort of highly organized group that is running projects related to UFOs, and they're quite developed, are operating outside the rule of law of any country. And that is dangerous because they're sitting on information and, more importantly, technologies. One of the things we found, for example, is that beginning in the 30s and 40s, and certainly by the 50s, we were studying the modus operandi. I'm quoting from a top secret Canadian document, the Wilbur Smith document from 1951, which I'm sure you've seen. It has this statement that by that time, there was a high-profile group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush, who headed up the Manhattan Project, to look into how these things were operating. And by the mid to late 50s, we had figured out the energy and propulsion systems behind so-called anti-gravity, extracting energy from the fabric of space so you don't have a fuel to carry. And that once they realized what this was, and that it would be a threat to the big corporate kleptocracy that runs the world, big oil, fossil fuels, centralized utilities, centralized economies, that they put the lid on this and took it out of the supervision even of the US president and most members of Congress and the British Prime Minister and et cetera and so on. Most high officials in the Pentagon know very little about this subject because I have been the person to brief them. And the ones who do know are part of this conspiracy of silence, for lack of a better word, to cooperate to keep this stuff very secret. The secrecy isn't because people are afraid that they're going to find out that there's life in the universe. It's because if it's confirmed that these UFOs are real, and they are, with it will become an immediate question by the scientific community, well, how are they operating? And when that gets asked, we have people who can answer it. And when that gets answered, it's the end of big oil, it's the end of coal, it's the end of centralized electric utilities, and it's the biggest change in the global macroeconomic order since the Industrial Revolution of the mid-1800s. That's what we're dealing with. The secrecy is clearly related to that, nothing else. It's all about power and geopolitical power and centralized power. A lot of people don't realize there's about 250 integrated corporations and individuals in the world that control virtually all of the world economy. And they're all interrelated. They're vertically and horizontally integrated. And their interests in this are profound. I remember Lawrence Rockefeller when I was out at his ranch, and of course he had hosted President Clinton and his wife, Hillary Clinton, for a couple of years during their vacations in August during his presidency. And they were out there actually because we were doing briefings. I was putting together big briefing documents, and Lawrence Rockefeller was sort of a mediator, providing information to them. And you know, I was at his ranch out in the Tetons once, and he turned to me, he said, Dr. Greer, you know, no aspect of life on Earth will be untouched by this information coming out. So vast and so profound are the implications. I said, I know, Mr. Rockefeller, that's why it's been kept secret. is not because it's a silly thing. Now, what the controllers, the disinformation controllers, want the public to believe is that it's about silly stuff like, oh, you know, an alien took me on board a spaceship and I have a baby floating in an incubator around Alpha Centauri, what I call the silly season of all this. And that disinformation is put out there through the UFO subculture, through the media, through documentary makers, through filmmakers who don't know the difference between information and disinformation. 90% of everything on this subject is disinformation, designed to do two things: either engender fear, because it's very frightening information which shuts people down, or to make it look silly and absurd so that serious scientists, policymakers, intellectuals, and academics will just dismiss it out of hand. And it's been done consistently since the 40s and 50s. And I have documents that prove that this is the case. I have a CIA document stating, this is in the 1950s, that this is a subject for the use of psychological warfare techniques and psyops. And that is true. And so it's something where the public, for the most part, is greatly disinformed deliberately. You know, not just misinformed, but disinformed. What the Disclosure Project's trying to do is, by referring to people who've had firsthand involvement with these projects, plus our own firsthand research, real-time research, is to put together the assessments of what's going on. And we feel this is important to share that with the President or members of the Senate Intelligence Committee as it is with the general public, because contrary to what the public would think on something this sensitive, most people in government, even high officials in government, if they even know this could be true, if they make an inquiry about it, this happened to President Carter, it happened to President Clinton, it's happened to many high officials. They are basically told, we're not going to tell you. Sometimes they'll just be denied that it exists at all, but sometimes they will flat out say, we're not going to tell you. Give you an example. In the late 1990s, after I had briefed members of Congress on this problem, I was invited to do a stand-up briefing at the Pentagon for the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what's called J2. And this admiral I had provided, and in our book, Disclosure, which you can get at the website disclosureproject.org, we have a document that actually is from the 90s, early 90s, that lists code names and project names and code numbers that were authentic and legitimate as of that time dealing with this issue. I gave this to the admiral's point of contact to us. He looked into it. He actually found one of those compartmented secret cells in the Pentagon. He called them and said, I want to be read into or briefed on this project. And they said, sir, you don't have a need to know. This is the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, we're not talking about some low-level munchkin out here. Now, what that means is that you have a complete decapitation of the constitutional leadership. And it also means that it's very important for us to try to identify intelligence sources who are courageous enough to come forward and speak the truth and put that information out to the public. Because I think nothing less than the future of planet Earth is hanging in the balance. And we're not talking just about whether or not people know there are UFOs. We're talking about what are we going to do about the fact that we're about to reach peak oil? What are we going to do with the fact that we have global warming and both polar ice caps are melting? What are we going to do about the fact that there is this increasing concentration of wealth in a few hands, but increasing poverty around the world that's engendering terrorism and hatred and conflict? All these are trend lines that can be corrected by this information and these technologies coming out. Not just information, it's about the fact that there are seriously important technologies that would give us an entirely new sustainable civilization that are being kept secret because letting them out makes redundant and obsolete. Disclosure Project is a worldwide effort to identify military and government and some corporate insiders who've had personal knowledge, extraterrestrial or UFO or advanced propulsion related systems that have been kept secret for at least 50 or 60 years. The Disclosure Project's oriented towards putting together credible government documents and these witnesses so that there is an undeniable case made that this is real and not fictitious. It started really in early 1990s. And after I had briefed the President Clinton's first CIA director on this problem, it was made very clear to me that the executive branch of the US government did not want to do this because, I'm quoting, the president was concerned he would end up like Jack Kennedy. I'm not kidding. That was said to me by President Clinton's closest friend. So what we decided to do was to take this on ourselves and initially put this information in the hands of members of Congress to see if they would hold open hearings. And when they chose not to, by '98, we decided to do this ourselves. And so the Disclosure Project was an outgrowth of our identifying the intelligence sources and the evidence, and then putting it through the system of government to give the government of we the people the opportunity to do the right thing and end all the illegal secrecy and bring this information out. Since they did not have the courage to do so in 2001, about 4 years ago, we decided to go ahead and do that ourselves. And since then, we have been putting this information out in the public domain. Now, our website's had over 10 million people on it. We have a Disclosure Project video that was the National Press Club event that's been seen by nearly 3 million people, which is quite a large number. And we just continue to put that information out through venues like this and speaking and what have you. We still would like to see the Congress take this on, but I think given the current governmental penchant for secrecy and supporting corporate illegal projects, it's unlikely that's going to happen. So I think it's really going to be in our laps. We, the people, are going to have to tell the truth. And so the Disclosure Project is a nonprofit effort to assemble the best possible witnesses and the best available evidence and put it out to the public and also to our leaders. We know people can see a lot of this at disclosureproject.org, which is our website, and we have over 450 military and intelligence witnesses. They range from generals and brigadier generals to air traffic controllers and strategic air command personnel in the Air Force, to civilian people in the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, to astronauts and cosmonauts. And it's an enormous database of people who have up close and personally seen UFOs or worked in those projects in their capacity as a government or military person. And most of them had top secret clearances, some of them highly compartmented. And their information is really dispositive. We have enormous documentation that is corroborated by multiple people. For example, when I said, let's see what the Strategic Air Command and what the interest has been in these extraterrestrial vehicles for nuclear, seeing what we're doing with nuclear weapons, we decided not to identify one or two, but we have like a couple dozen of those people who were in Strategic Air Command, who were in nuclear facilities, who were in the old Atomic Energy Commission, like Colonel Diedrichson that we have as a witness, who had personal knowledge of the fact that even though there's clearly no evidence, I want to emphasize this, that these extraterrestrial civilizations are hostile towards us, I think they're very worried about our hostility. I always turn this on its head because most of these sort of documentaries are always like alien invasion and all this stuff. No. The issue is that, if they were hostile, we would know it by now. It's clear to me that what's going on is that they're very concerned that at the time that humanity reached the ability to go into space, early space exploration, 50s, we also had already developed weapons of mass destruction and thermonuclear and hydrogen bombs and stuff. And that the coincidence of that, the coming together of those two things, put a big red flag over Earth. And so if you look at the databases from the 50s, 60s, 70s on forward, not only in the United States, but in Great Britain, in the Soviet Union, in China, that wherever we had space, aerospace, and nuclear facilities, there were a lot of these so-called UFOs being seen. And it makes sense because it's a very short distance from where we are now to being able to go further out into space with these kinds of aggressive tendencies. And one of the things I point out to people is that our social and spiritual development appears to have lagged behind our technological prowess. And our technological capacities are actually, at this point, a threat to perhaps the cosmic order, if you will. A term called fast walkers that's been used from people who have been at NORAD that have tracked these objects in near-Earth space. Actually, that term was used in the 60s and 70s. The National Security Agency actually for a long time had called these ETVs, extraterrestrial vehicles. The word UFO is actually a disinformation term that was invented after they knew that they weren't unidentified and they knew they didn't fly. So it's sort of a mind play. The fast walkers are these very rapid moving electrogravitic and anti-gravity disks and craft of various shapes that are tracked on classified tracking systems, both in their deep space network and also in the atmosphere. We have more than one witness who have been involved in the tracking of these objects on radar. Many people say, well, look, if this stuff was real, why are there no radar reports? I said, we have them. We actually have the radar tapes from the FAA. So we have people from the FAA and from the military who have tracked these objects. And they've been called fast walkers because, as opposed to slow walkers, which are satellites, because they move at enormous speeds. For example, they've been tracked at going tens of thousands of miles per hour in the atmosphere and make a right-hand turn without decelerating. Well, you can't do that with a conventional system. You have to correct for gravity and mass inertia. And that's what these things are doing. So these have been tracked on dedicated and classified radar systems. Occasionally, people who are on an ordinary system will pick them up. If they really wanted to find out, I think they need to look at these firsthand top secret witnesses and what they've seen. I think that if you go to the civilians, it's a whole gamish of misinformation, disinformation, and amateur hour. What we've tried to do is professionalize the effort, and people really need to look. I mean, if somebody who had the clearance to carry nuclear weapons or launch nuclear weapons saw these objects over a nuclear facility and reported it and have documents to prove it happened, this is dispositive. That's what someone who is wanting to look into this, who says, well, could this really be true and I don't know about it? They need to look at that, and we've assembled it. We have a 600-page book of top secret documents and the transcripts of these witnesses. We have videotapes, we have a 4-hour tape, we have a 2-hour tape, we have a 1-hour tape. And our website, disclosureproject.org, actually has a lot of this information and the testimony on there. I think that's what people need to look at, and it's the weight of the evidence. But if you wanted to look at one case, for example, that would be dispositive, look at what the third highest ranking member of the FAA, John Callahan, brought to us. This man, during the Reagan years, was in charge of accidents and investigations for the FAA in the United States, the Federal Aviation Administration. He was called into a case, which is the Japan Airlines case over Alaska, where an extraterrestrial vehicle the size of a huge ship was being tracked on military radar, civilian radar, and onboard a 747's onboard radar for a prolonged period of time. This was given back to him. He did an analysis of the data. He determined that it was a real structured object moving at enormous and unusual velocities. In fact, it would be one point in the sky and then instantly would be in another place 40, 50 miles away. And this thing was the size of, he said, of a destroyer, a battleship. Big, huge. It wasn't like 30 feet around. It was hundreds of feet. This was seen by the pilot. We have the pilot's report. We have the original radar tapes and the digital reports, this thick of a report. He was called in to do a briefing for Ronald Reagan's science advisor, people from the CIA and FBI. At the end of that meeting, they turned to him and they said, you were not at this meeting, this event didn't happen, and we're confiscating all this stuff. What they didn't know is that they confiscated duplicates. He kept the originals, and when he retired, he gave them to us. This man's name is John Callahan. We have his name, address, a phone number. We have all this evidence. That's one case. So, I mean, and it's dispositive. And the question is, if you have one case like that, it proves it. But we have hundreds of cases like that. So I would say to people, look at the evidence. The evidence is there. Now, the big question is, why doesn't the masses of people know about it? The only institution that is more corrupt than what I'm describing as this rogue transnational kleptocracy is the major media. Worse than the Congress, worse than the White House, worse than anything at the normal level of clearances at the Pentagon is big media. Big media does not report the truth about these things because they are not free to. And we think in the United States and in the Western world, we really have a free press. We have a free press on everything that's not important. On the really important issues, it's very controlled. And this is the most important issue. This is the biggest secret in the history of the human race, the known modern history of government. And they have cooperated with keeping this secret. ABC News and other major networks were at the Disclosure Project National Press Club event about 4 years ago. The executive producer for ABC News told me they wanted to do a very big expose on this through Primetime Live or 2020. I said, we'll give you everything. So we gave him literally, you know, the sort of distilled 35 hours of digital videotape of these witnesses and all our documents. So he could do this, and carte blanche access to all these top secret witnesses. He called me a couple weeks later and said, well, they won't let me do this. I said, who's they? He says, well, Dr. Greer, you know who they are. And so the people, the corporate bosses who answer to some of these transnational financial and other interests were basically killed the project. We've seen this happen over and over again. And so you can get a certain amount of information out through the large media, but it's very superficial, very brief. That's what we found. the in-depth sort of disclosure of what's really going on, who's behind it, what the agenda is, that is almost always stopped. Or if they try to do it, it gets turned into something ridiculous. So my point is that the media people, the rank and file, are often very interested, but then from somewhere deeper and higher than they are, it gets killed if they try to do anything in depth. So that's what we have found. And so the in-depth information, I think we have to put out through the internet, through other documentaries and through other means. Maybe eventually there will be a media interest that is large media that will do a true expose of this. We stand ready to work with anyone who's willing to do that. We all have a responsibility to find out what the truth is about something like this. And people have to take responsibility for looking into what the truth is. We've put together the means for people to do that. Now people have to take the initiative, and we need all the help we can get. I would ask people to help us network this to anyone and any institution that can help. The reason this is so critical is that we've reached a point in our civilization where for us to go forward as a people, we're going to have to end this kind of illegal secrecy. And we're going to have to allow this information and these technologies to get out, begin to fix many of these large problems. The question of UFOs and extraterrestrials, most people just think is something entertaining. In reality, it's something that is central to how we're going to be able to go forward as a civilization, because that issue involves sciences, technologies, energy and propulsion systems that could give us a whole new civilization. Imagine being able to run your house or your car or your business from an energy source that is non-polluting, doesn't connect to a central grid, does not use fossil fuels or nuclear power, and is extracting energy from what's called the space around us, the quantum vacuum space. That's what these technologies do. We, the taxpayers, have through our government and what's called the black budget, it's about $100 billion a year, put money that have gone into corporations like Lockheed, Northrop, SAIC, EG&G, Raytheon and E-Systems, Atlantic Research Corporation, and those entities have these technologies. It's time for us to say, we would like to have a dividend on that investment. And this information belongs to the people, the technologies belong to the people, and the earth and all of humanity needs to have these technologies for peaceful energy generation.
If you liked this video and you want to see more amazing content, go ahead and check out the next video on our channel.